What's going on, everyone? Stockton here from Better Than Data, and in this video we are going to be covering 6 super useful, handy, and powerful custom JavaScript variables that I use all the time to transform data, to manipulate things, and prepare it and get it ready to send on to all of our different platforms for things like conversion tracking and tracking e-commerce events and things like that. So that's what we're going to be covering in this video, and we're going to look at 6 examples of custom JavaScript variables. Now, if you are wondering kind of what maybe the next step is for you in terms of getting better at data collection, data visualization, and the strategy piece around how to actually use data and take action on data, then head on over to betterthandata.com/YouTube, where we have this little quiz prepared for you where you can fill it out and kind of see where you are on the scale to know what is next. So if you like this type of video and this type of training where you're learning how to do certain things and the way we do things, then you will like what we have for you after you complete the quiz. All right, let's jump into 6 custom JavaScript examples. Here we are inside of our GTM, and you can see we have a pretty bare setup right here. So we have a Facebook page view and purchase. We have our GA4 config with GA4 e-commerce events and GA4 page view. And we are using WooCommerce for this because the GA4 for WordPress plugin makes it really easy to push data layer events into WooCommerce, and that's why everyone uses it for testing and showcasing things. But for now, what we are going to do is quickly just do a preview, and I want to show you what happens on the website. So when we first click on the website, there's a few things. Once this loads up, first thing is you'll notice that there is a opt-in box, and one of the JavaScript variables, we're actually going to grab the value of the email here. And the other thing is when I click this sort by, we're actually going to trigger a purchase event. So you can see right here, after I clicked on the sort by little thing, we triggered a purchase event. Now, every time we trigger the purchase event, if you look right here, it will have a random transaction ID, and that will be important just later. Here, I'll click it again, see what we get this time. So before it was 927, and now it's 685. All right, so now that we kind of have an understanding how the site and GTM is set up, the first custom JavaScript variable that we are going to use is one to detect if the page has reloaded or not. So to do that, what we're going to do is come to variables, we're going to hit new, we're going to choose variable configuration of custom JavaScript. Now remember, with custom JavaScript variables, you always have kind of a base setup that you have to do. You have this anonymous function, so it says function. It's got just the 2 little brackets here. There's no name, so it's called an anonymous function. And then you have to return something. So every custom JavaScript variable has to return a certain value. So it has to be a custom function, anonymous function like this, and then you have to return something. Okay, now I've prepared a bit of code here to put here that will help us detect if the page has reloaded or not. Basically, what it's doing is it's creating a variable called performance entries or perf entries, looking for navigation entries, and then it's saying if the page has this reload entry, then return true, otherwise return false. So let's call this custom JavaScript, so CJS. And is page reloaded? Question mark. That's the way I like to do it. So this will tell us it'll be true if the page is reloaded and false if the page is not reloaded. Reloaded meaning like they hit the reload button in the browser. So let's preview this. We'll go preview here, connect to the website. And if we look at just like the page view trigger and we go to variables and we see our custom JavaScript is page reloaded variable here, it's telling us false. So this is telling us that the page was not reloaded, or this was like the first time viewing the page. But if we actually come back and reload the page, so Command R or hit the refresh button here, we'll have a new page view event right here. And if we look at that page view trigger, we can now see that this turned to true. So it's saying, is the page reloaded? Yes, true. That it was. This is now a page reload. And so why is that important? What do we want to do with that? Well, we can now create a new trigger, for example, on that purchase event. So let's go new, custom event for the purchase event, but not all purchase events. We only want the purchase event when the page was not reloaded. So we can choose our new custom JavaScript is page reloaded variable, and this has to equal false, meaning the page was not reloaded or it was the first time they viewed that page. If you're tracking certain events like purchases every time the page loads, so it's just a page view trigger, then this will help mitigate against that to make sure that the event is only fired once, because you're now able to track if they've reloaded the page or not. It doesn't help if they bookmark the page and come back later, like a different session, or they close the browser and come back, things like that. But for same session, kind of same moments, if they were just reloading the page, then this would help. So let's come and check this. So our new trigger is purchase first view only. It's the event. And lowercase. Okay, so we'll hit save. And then let's add that new trigger to our Facebook purchase event. So we're going to swap out the old purchase for our new first view only purchase. And let's test this. We'll go preview. And hit continue. So if I click our sort by to get our purchase event, the tag did fire, right? So here's our Facebook purchase event because the variable is false. But if we reload the page and then I click there, then on this new purchase event, it is now turned to true. So I would expect the tag not to have fired, and it did not. So Facebook did not fire because this was now true, telling us that the page reloaded, and so the tag doesn't meet the conditions anymore and isn't fired. So that is the first one. How we can track is if the page is reloaded or not, and create a new trigger based off of that for the, in this case, the purchase event. The next custom JavaScript variable is one that this is probably the most useful one to me. And this is to remap data from an existing schema to a new schema. And so what I mean by that is, let's take a look at this purchase event. And if we look here at the items array, so here we have items, it's an array of objects, and inside each object it has certain keys, right? So item ID, item name. And so what we want to do is we want to take this existing items array and we want to remap those keys to have different names. And the use case for this is for Facebook, right? So we're going to take a GA4 items array schema and we're going to remap it to be for a Facebook schema so that we can use the same data in the format that Facebook wants, even though it's coming into our GTM with the GA4 way of things. So to do that, let's come back to our JavaScript variables here. So we're going to go to variables and let's create a custom JavaScript variable here. So this one, I have prepared the code here, but we know that it has to always start. Oops, that's the same as before. Copy from here, paste. Okay. So we know that it has to be that anonymous function, right? And we have to return something. So far, so good. Now, if we just take a quick, brief explanation of what this is doing, is you first have to decide what is the source array of data, right? So in this case, we're referencing a variable called e-commerce items. And if we look at that variable at the purchase event, for e-commerce items, you can see that it is this is the source, right? So this is an array of objects that was pushed into GTM. So we first have to define what the source is. And to do that, we were just referencing a variable that that pulls that array out of the data layer. And then you take that variable and you call the map function on it. When you call the map function, you have to pass in what is the source. So we're going to take the source, we're going to pass in what each individual item is called. So we're going to call it product, and then we're going to remap it. So for Facebook, what Facebook wants is, instead of item underscore ID like the source has, it just wants it to say ID. So we're going to remap item ID to ID. And for the item name, Facebook wants it to say title. So we're going to remap item name to say title. And from the source, it says price, but for Facebook, we want it to say item price. I actually think that's wrong. For Facebook, we wanted to say price. So those actually match, which is nice. The source had price, and the destination we want it to be price as well. So item brand goes to just brand, and then quantity stays the same, and item category goes to category. You also notice here that quantity, if it wasn't defined in the source, then we're just going to default to having a quantity of 1. So Facebook wants it like that as well. So let's call this custom JavaScript Facebook contents. And we'll hit save. Now, where do we use this? Well, inside of our Facebook purchase event, we would come down to the object properties, and there is a property that you need to pass to Facebook if you want to do the dynamic remarketing based on the what's called the list you have inside of Facebook, or the catalog, I should say. Then you need to be able to pass the catalog, what products they viewed or purchased back to Facebook, and you do that through the contents parameter. So here, we wouldn't be able to pass just the e-commerce items like this, right? Because that's the wrong format. That's the GA4 format. So we needed to reformat it to be what Facebook wants. So for that, we have our new custom JavaScript variable, which will return the data in Facebook format instead of GA4 format. So let's preview this. Okay, it takes a second. There we go. And if we trigger our purchase event and we look here, we have our Facebook purchase tag. And if we look at the variables, then we would be able to see here at the top, custom JavaScript starts with a C. So now it's going to be at the top for me, which is nice. We have our Facebook contents, and we notice we still have our array of objects, but these keys are different. So now we have ID 19 instead of what we had down here, which was item ID 19. So we've remapped those keys into a new array of objects, and that way we can send the right data to all of the different platforms. So you could actually use the same concept and process to take a GA4 array of objects and remap it to a universal analytics, to Facebook, which we just did, to Google Ads, to any of these ad vendors that want to receive product data in a certain format. You would use a custom JavaScript variable and remap the data. Okay, so that is remapping an array of objects. That one is super useful, and we use it all the time. The next one, to first check one variable to see if it has a value, and if it doesn't, return a different variable. And I'll show you the use case for this. So as an example, when we trigger a purchase event, then in local storage, so if I open my console, I go to application, local storage here, we are pushing a bit of information around the transaction ID into local storage. And we're also setting a cookie with transaction ID that has the same value. So transaction ID with the actual transaction ID is being set in both local storage and in the cookie. So what we could do is we're going to create our custom JavaScript variable to look for these different values in one or both places. First, we're going to say, hey, grab the value from local storage. If it doesn't exist in local storage, then grab it from the cookie. And we could keep going on and say, if it's not in the cookie, then grab it from a data layer variable. And if it's not in that data layer variable, grab it from another location. We could just keep kind of sequencing these on and on and on. But to do that, the logic is handled in the custom JavaScript variable, because remember, we want to return a value with custom JavaScript variables. So it's just going to look in various places for that value. So let's go to here, grab our custom JavaScript variable, start with function, spell it right, return, and then we basically just include where are we looking for the two values, so value 1, and then use the OR statement in JavaScript and then look for value 2. So here the first one we could look for is we could actually just try and grab local storage directly. So if we go window.local, I'm probably going to butcher this, local storage.get item transaction ID, that will first look for that value from local storage. And let's just test this first of all. So custom JavaScript, transaction ID, storage. Let's just test that one first, and then we can delete it from local storage and test it again to see if it works or not. Okay, loading up. Here we go. So from local storage, we have transaction ID with a value of 723. So if we look on any event, we can go here. And it worked. So custom JavaScript transaction ID storage returns 723, which actually does match what we have here. Now, if I was to delete this and then trigger a new event, so we could trigger the add to cart event, for example, then we know that after the add to cart event, that value should no longer exist. See, and this now says null. But we also know that it still exists in the cookie. So if we look here under transaction ID, that value is still in a cookie. So as a fallback, we want to search for both places. Check local storage first, then check a cookie. It doesn't have to be local storage and cookies. It can be anything. First, to check a cookie, to make it easy, let's just create a new variable for that. So there is actually a variable that looks for first-party cookies, and the cookie name is transaction ID. So first-party cookie, transaction ID, just like that. And now in our custom JavaScript variable, we want to do the or, so the two bars there, and then reference the variable we just created, first party cookie, transaction ID. So what this is going to do is it's first going to look here. If there's nothing there, then it's going to look here. So in this case, when we hit save, preview, and it loads up. Okay, we can see that under local storage, transaction ID doesn't exist, but under the cookies, it does. So on any event, we should still have a value here because it looked in both places. So when we just had local storage, the value didn't exist, this was null. But now that we've added that second condition to also look for the cookie, then it returns that value. So it becomes super powerful when you have data that could be in one of two places and you want to reference one or the other depending if it's there or not. Another use case for this is for event IDs, so Facebook event IDs and deduplication. First, I can check and see if there's a transaction ID. If a transaction ID exists, use that because that would be for a purchase event. Otherwise, use just like the event ID variable to return a unique event ID for that event. So that is another use case there. All right. The next use case of a custom JavaScript variable, so this is number 4, is we can test, we can return certain values based on certain conditions. So if, basically an if statement, right? If XYZ, then return B, right? And so we can set that up. So our use case here is actually, if we view the data layer, there is some information in the data layer that tells us what the customer total orders is. So what we want to do is say if customer total orders is above 1, so 1 or more, then they are an existing customer. If customer total orders is 0, then we want to say that they are a new customer. And where would we use this? We would use this in Google Ads. So Google Ads wants to know if customers are new or not, so we can tell if they're new or not based on their customer total orders. So let's create the custom JavaScript variable for that. Before we do that, we actually need to have a data layer variable that references this bit of information so we know what the value is. So customer total orders, camel case, so customer total orders. Okay, just like that. And then we create our custom JavaScript variable. So we've got function and return something. And so what we want to do is first check a condition. So we want to say if data layer variable for customer total orders is above, greater than, or equal to 1. So that is the condition. And then we could do what's called a ternary operator where you say, if that's true, so question mark, if that's true, return certain value. So we'll say, if that's true, then false, meaning they are an existing customer. Otherwise, true. And this will make sense if we go like this and we say custom JavaScript is new customer, question mark. So if total orders is above 1, is new customer false, meaning they are not a new customer. Otherwise, true, meaning they are a new customer because they don't have one order yet. So we'll hit save. And now we will preview this. And there we go. Okay, so if I look at any event under custom JavaScript variables, we'll say custom JavaScript, is this a new customer? True, right? Because I'm not logged in, WordPress doesn't know who I am at this point, so it doesn't know how many orders that I have placed. However, if we were to actually go and place an actual order, so let's go through the checkout real fast. Now that we've completed the purchase and I'm actually logged in and things, if we look at that purchase event and we look under the data layers for that data layer variable right here, customer total orders is 224, so a few. And then we have the custom JavaScript variable now that is set to false because this value is now 1 or more. So am I a new customer? No. And we would use that inside of Google Ads to tell it if it is a new customer or not. And then Google Ads can use that to do whatever optimization they do. Next up is if we want to reformat some numbers. So as an example, if we look at this purchase event and we look at the Facebook pixel helper, the value for this is a really ugly number. So 444.987 blah, blah, blah. It's got a big ol' ugly decimal number and it's not formatted correctly. So we want to use a custom JavaScript variable to kind of reformat this and transform that number to something that Facebook actually wants to see. To do that, we are going to use just a JavaScript function inside of our custom JavaScript. So we got to start with our anonymous function and then return something. And what we're going to return is our e-commerce value. So the value of the transaction, which matches, if we just go look at that variable, so e-commerce value right here is that big, long, ugly number. And we actually just want to round this. So we can say math.round and then wrap that in brackets. And then we can call this custom JavaScript e-commerce value formatted like this. We can hit save, and then we can make sure we use that value in our tag instead of the e-commerce value. So object properties value, here we would replace this with our nicely formatted value instead of that big, long, ugly one. So let's test this out. We'll go preview, and let's trigger the purchase event. So here we've got Facebook purchase, and the value is now 445 instead of what is originally pushed into the data layer, which is 444.98. So rounding it, just rounded it up to the nice nearest whole number. If we want to include decimals, what we could do is actually change that variable to be, instead of rounding it, we could just say 2 fixed, which should just round it up to the nearest 2 decimal places. So let's go preview again, try that one out. Continue, trigger our purchase event, come back and look. So the original value is 4498 blah, blah, blah. And if we look at our nicely formatted value, custom JavaScript, we have it up to rounded to 2 decimal places. Notice how it is a string, and we may want to make sure that that stays as a number. To do that, we can add on one more bit, which would be, what is that one? Parse float. Parse float around this. Parse float will convert the string to a number. So we'll hit save and we'll re-preview that. Regenerate our purchase event, and here under variables we have now it's a number format. So we still have rounded it to decimal places, but instead of being a string, it is now a number, and everything should be right in the world of Facebook where we're passing that value nice and neat. And again, what we did here was we took the original value, we rounded it to 2 decimal places, and then we wrapped it in parse float to make it a number. And that's what we did there. All right, and the last one is we want to actually grab a value dynamically from the page. And to do this, we're going to use what's called a query selector. And just to demonstrate, we're going to open up the console. So I'm going to right click, hit inspect on this, because we need to be able to use this elements panel here to identify what the exact element is that we're looking for. And here I can see that we have an element that is an input type, and it has this attribute called type equals email. So that's simple enough. We'll use that. So let's come to console. Let me clear this. And we are going to use document. We're going to test this before we actually put it in. So document.querySelector. And the selector we're going to look for is that input. And then it had an attribute of type equals email. So we're going to use the square bracket, and we're going to say type equals, and then in quotes what that type is, close the brackets, close the selector, and it should return, oops, it got ahead of me. We added on dot value. Without the dot value, it should return that exact element, but we don't want the element, we want what's inside the element, so that's where you would add on dot value. So if I hit up on the keyboard, it brings back the most recent command in the console, and then here I would type in dot value to return the value of what's inside of that element, and here we have returned my email address. If I change this to just be test, 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 and we redo that selector, it's going to grab that dynamically. So then we can use this basically exactly. I'm just going to copy and paste this into our custom JavaScript variable. Custom JavaScript, so we got function, return something, and what do we want to return? That value from this input box. So we'll go custom JavaScript variable for input email form. That's as good as it's going to get as far as defining that right now. Okay, and because data persists in that form, we should have it available basically right away. So if I look at page loaded, under the variables, we have our custom JavaScript for input, email, and the form. We do indeed return that value. So that is also a method called DOM scraping. So we're scraping the DOM to get values using document, using a query selector. So that is super powerful to use for grabbing values like the title of a product, the price of a product, transaction IDs, anything that's on the page. You can use that kind of format of query selector and choosing the exact element and type you want to grab the data from, and then finding that value from the page directly. So that one is super versatile and used in tons of different cases. All right, there you go. That is 6 custom JavaScript examples. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you in the next video.